Hello, everyone. Hi, welcome to another Purposeful Conversations with Emmy here in the Pame Code Facebook community. And I'm really excited to talk to our guest for today because I know that there are people in our community these days. You are in a relationship, and sometimes you sort of lose yourself in the relationship, and it's really quite difficult to find your voice once again. So for today, I invited our guest. Dana Gaulke. She's a life and relationship coach, and we're here to talk about finding your voice in marriage and motherhood. So, Dana, thank you very much for
Hello.
joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, before we get started with this conversation, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you got into this path?
Yeah, so a little bit about me. I have been a life coach for a little over a year, and I primarily work with women who are married. And in the course of becoming a wife and a mother, they realize that they've kind of lost who they are. And a lot of times it's tied back to other things outside of just those roles. And so I really work with them to kind of reclaim who they are and rediscover what they stand for so that they can reconnect in their marriage. So my journey has been kind of a lot of different places, but it's really been born out of my own personal experiences, both being married at a young age and ending up being divorced and now being remarried in a blended family.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about your personal experience because what I've noticed is that a lot of life coaches, they help their clients, from something that they've experienced themselves. So tell us a little bit about your previous experience. Why did you become so passionate about this topic, and now that you are helping other women to reclaim their voice in marriage and motherhood?
Yeah, that's a big question, right? And you're right. It's usually born because of a personal experience, and I think that is what makes it so beautiful, right? Is when you have that personal connection. So, like I mentioned, I ended up marrying my high school sweetheart at the age of 21. We were together for about 5 years prior to that. And then at 23, I ended up becoming a mother. So, pretty young in my life. Checked the box, right? I did all the things. I married my high
Married,
school
kid.
sweetheart. I followed him. Yep, I followed him to college. Check. Then we got married. Check. Had a baby. Check. And, as I kind of approached my late 20s, I just started to realize that I didn't know who I was. And frankly, looking back, I maybe never really did get to figure that out. I was thrust into all of these roles and all of these societal stories of what you should do, what you need to do, how you should act. And I did all the right things, but then in the process, kind of lost who I was in my own voice. And so I ended up getting divorced in my early 30s and kind of launching into a self discovery journey of like, who am I now that I am 30 years old with a 6-year old daughter, and I'm for the very first time alone. Um, and what do I want and need for myself and for a future partner? And so, fast forward through that journey, which in all transparency, it was not a straight and narrow line. It was a lot of messes and a lot of toddler scribbles, but I found my way. And I ended up getting remarried to my husband in 2016. So that's kind of my journey and why I feel so passionate, because I understand the dangers of losing who you are.
Yeah, wow. That's actually really quite honest. And you've shown that okay, you might have felt that okay, you're following a certain path, and to some extent you're okay, but eventually you sort of just lose your voice, you lose your identity. It reminds me a little bit of the frog who is in a pot, and they boil the pot, and the frog doesn't realize that it's being boiled in the pot because it's
Mhm.
just there, and
Right.
eventually it's too late. The pot is already boiling, and it's quite hard for the frog to escape. But in your case, you actually noticed that you've lost your voice
Yes.
down that path, and you've managed to find your way, not in an easy way. I'm guessing it was quite a difficult time, but what sort of prompted you to find yourself again? Was it a specific point in your life, or it was just an accumulation of experiences and emotions and struggles? So what sort of prompted you to say, okay, I think I've lost my voice, I think I don't know who I am anymore? What prompted you to think about that?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and it's part of why most of the women that I work with are married, is because I think I started to notice issues in my relationship. Um, and so for many of us, we think like, if I'm having these feelings and my marriage is suffering, it's either or. Like, I either find myself and I have to leave the relationship because that's impossible to do in the relationship, or I have to stay in the relationship and not know who I am. And that's not really the case. So even though I ended up leaving mine, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how it has to play out. I think that in the process of having that kind of awakening over the period of, I would say, about a year, I started to realize that who I really was and who I wanted to be didn't match and wouldn't have likely happened in that relationship that I was in. And it wasn't going to allow me to fully be myself. And so that's kind of where I ended up making that decision. But really, it was that secondary notice of my relationship struggles that was like, something's not quite right here. Let me explore what is not right. And what I learned is that it was me. It was something within me that was really the challenge.
Yes, I think I was having this conversation with one of our guests a couple of days ago, Caitlin. Some of the struggles that we have, some of them could be internal and some could be external. And when it is an internal struggle, no matter where you go, if you haven't actually resolved your internal conflict, you will find the same struggles everywhere you go. So if it is a personal issue, then you actually have to resolve those deep-seated personal issues. But
Mm-hmm.
if the environment is toxic, no matter how much internal work that you're doing, if the environment is toxic, then you would struggle as well. So in your case, was that a balance of both internal and external struggles?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say that. I think what it was is I was a people pleaser. I wanted to make everybody happy, and I did so at the expense of myself. And I did that for a long, long time. And I call it like the shiny object syndrome. I can still remember back my mother saying, I feel like you're chasing something, you know? So I knew there was an internal something not right, but I didn't want to listen to it. So instead of tapping in and going inward like most of us should, but we don't, I got a new job, I had a baby, I got a new car, I bought a new house, I got a pet. I went back for my master's degree. Like, I just did all these things to try to plug some hole, thinking that I was going to feel better. And then you feel better for a little while, and then you realize, okay, still the same thing is still there. And so, I certainly think it was kind of a mix. But for me, it was trying to validate with external things while knowing that it was something internal. And I just didn't want to face it or acknowledge what it was.
Yeah. Did you have a mentor or a coach or a friend that helped you to resolve this? Because I think for some people, they can manage it on their own,
Mm-hmm.
and they can find ways to find what the problem is. It might take them a long time. It's not like overnight you realize what you need to do. But yeah, did you have someone who helped you through the process and supported you through your path to rediscovering your voice?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And honestly, it's probably the biggest reason why I decided to become a coach, is because I didn't. I had a great support system of friends, but I think when your marriage is really struggling, it's not always something that you want to talk about with people. It's something that you feel a lot of shame and vulnerability about. When you're realizing that you've kind of lost your own way, you've lost your own voice. And on the outside, it looked like the white picket fence club. I looked like I had it all together, right? I didn't want a lot of people to see inside. So I held that really close to my vest. And I wished I would have had more of a third party, someone to walk through that with me. My ex-husband and I did go to a counselor, but that was just a different type of support than what I needed. And so that is what prompted me to want to be a coach. Is I think it can be a really lonely and vulnerable place when you're experiencing these feelings, your marriage is struggling, and you feel really isolated and you don't have anyone to turn to, even if you have a great support system of friends, which I did. So that's part of it.
It does make a difference. I mean, that's why we actually call our group PAME, the PAME code. PAME is actually a Greek word that means let's go together. And,
Mm,
in life, we can go together, whether it is a struggle or whether you want to celebrate your wins. It actually makes life sweeter and easier actually to share your life and your struggles and your wins with other people. So yeah, for me, I did experience losing my voice, losing my identity, not necessarily in the relationship, but in the work context. After motherhood, you sort
mhm,
of have all these different new roles, because in the past you're just you, and then suddenly you have a husband, and then you have a child, and then where's the professional life, where's me
yeah.
in the picture? And it could spiral into mental health difficulties if you're losing your identity in that way, if you've known yourself in a certain light, and adding all these new roles in the mix can be confusing. And for me as a psychologist, I thought I can manage it on my own, but wait,
Yeah.
it's almost
Right.
like saying, doctors and nurses, they can't get sick. It's the same
Well,
for.
you can't see your own brain, right? Like
Exactly.
you need someone outside of yourself to really reflect to you what you're thinking, because it's impossible to see your own brain. And it's interesting when you were saying that, it's like yes, 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 and boundaries like all over the place. Like I think that was the biggest thing I learned, was that I really lacked boundaries, because boundaries help you preserve your identity, right? And I didn't have a lot of those. They were blurred. So that was one of the biggest takeaways I've learned.
Boundaries, yeah. I think in my case, let me share with you a story. And I think my terrified, traumatized students can recall this, because I wanted to set boundaries, but I think the boundaries were set pretty late. So there was a point where I was just absolutely exhausted trying to juggle motherhood and work and so on. And I told my students, look, I'm not going to answer emails during the Christmas break because it's family time. You're not supposed to be knocking on my door on Christmas Eve, asking me questions about your coursework because we're supposed to be on a break. So I've been telling them this from week 1. And come week 12, I told them, just a reminder, if you have any questions, ask me now, because during the break, you can't email me. And then one student raised her hand and said, I think it's unfair that, we can't ask you questions during the Christmas break. What if we have, things that we don't know about? And, I just completely snapped in front of like 50 students. Is like I nearly cried, and they were just horrified, because you can see I'm usually a really happy, chirpy, person, but I just completely lost it. So I did try to set boundaries at that time, but I think I was just absolutely exhausted, that in my good sense, I just couldn't really respond, in a civilized manner, if you like, to that particular reaction. So what do you think would have been the best way to do this? Like, is there a way to prevent that from happening? For example, in relationships, you might just snap at your partner because you're just absolutely exhausted, or you might snap at your kids because you're just completely overwhelmed. So how do you manage this, and how do you share your voice? How do you yeah, to reclaim your voice without actually, what's the word I'm looking for, without actually snapping at the people around you?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're all human, right? So, I mean, we're going to deal with stress in a lot of different ways. And so, an example, like, right now, my kids are doing distance learning. I might be on a conference call for work. When your kid comes downstairs and they're trying to ask you a question, and you're also trying to have a conversation with someone else, that's really frustrating. I think with boundaries, it's not about the other person, right? It's about you. So even in your example, it's like, um, it's saying to them, you can come to me over break. Like you can send me an email over break with a question. However, you might find that I don't respond to you because I am on break, right? And that's very different than saying you can't do this and you can't do that. And so I think it's when you kind of take the power back of saying, you can do whatever you want because I don't have control over you. Like my kids could come to the stairs and try to talk to me, but they may just find I'm going to pretend like they're invisible, right? And I do. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just kind of taking your power back and saying, this is how I'm going to respond. Should you do that? But that's your choice. If you want to do that, that's okay. And I
I
think that
love that.
sometimes, yeah, and I think sometimes we have thoughts about a situation. So, for example, if my husband comes home from work, he's a first responder. So when he comes home, he might be exhausted. And I might, let's say I snap at him because I've been home with the kids all day, like I think that he then has the power to make that mean something. He can make that mean that I am just a jerk, or he could make that mean she's exhausted, or he could make that mean like, I'm going to pretend that didn't happen, right? Like we get to choose what we think about what someone else says or does. And so I think being mindful of the thoughts that we have and what we make certain things mean makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's certainly something that I find with my own clients. I often remind them that look, the way your colleagues behave or the way your partner behaves is actually out of our control.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can control is the way you process the information, the way you process your interaction, and it is ultimately your decision how you're going to respond to that. And what you've said earlier about you can do whatever you want and I can do whatever I want, that's actually quite liberating
Mm-hmm.
because it
It is.
reminds you that you can't actually control other people's behavior. They can do whatever they want, but your response is something that's within your control. It's a matter of how you process the information and using that information to make a decision on how you would behave. So that's actually really refreshing to hear because some
Yeah, and
people
you mentioned
forget that.
yeah, and you mentioned self-awareness, right? Because like that's what the only way to do all those things that you talked about is to have self-awareness, which is why I think it's such an important skill that so many people lack. And it's probably one of the most important things you can really learn how to do.
Right. And I do remember I was having a call, a coaching call with a client, and she's someone who likes to fix everything. Like if there is a problem in the workplace, she would want to fix that. If there is a problem in her family's interactions, like if people are fighting, she would want to fix that. And
Mm-hmm.
as a result, she's always quite exhausted. She's quite miserable because there are certain things that she can't fix. And I sort of ask her, okay, your colleague's problem, it's your problem because, and she said, well, no, it's not really my problem, it's her problem. So it's, again, it's that, processing. It's being able to realize which problems are yours and which ones
Mm-hmm.
do you need to fix or not need to fix. And again, as you've said, it comes down to boundaries as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is this something that you've noticed in your case or with the clients that you work with as well?
In terms of wanting to fix other people or fix situations. Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to like people pleasing, right? And there's something, I guess it's sort of interesting. When you were saying that back to me, my thought was, ooh, I wonder what's going on there because I would explore and be curious. And this is what I do with clients too that I find have this is like, what is it within you that has you wanting to fix that? Like there's some payoff for you to wanting to be involved in that, to wanting to cure that issue, right? You're getting some sort of reward out of that? Like, what is that? And so oftentimes there's some sort of validation, right? There's some sort of, you feel needed, you feel wanted, you feel some sort of worthiness. And it usually comes down to that as a core, when that's sort of a challenge for people. But yes, I see it all the time with people. And I've dealt with that myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where having a coach or a mentor becomes really helpful, because you have that other person
Mm-hmm.
probing you with these questions that make you reflect and think about, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I responding in this way? What am I gaining? What am I losing? What's the purpose of all this? So yeah, certainly having someone to support you can certainly help. Dana, can I just ask, what is the most common issue that your clients usually face right now? When it comes to their relationships and when it comes to motherhood and having a family as a whole.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to thinking that it's their partner, but really it's something internal. And that's what I see the most. But my clients don't see that right away. They see that he is doing this or he's doing that. And so I think that's often the most common thing, is that we think that it's something else. We want to fix or change someone else to make ourselves feel better. But really, we can only make ourselves feel better. And so it's working together to kind of identify what's really going on. Because as we know, like if you've ever seen that graphic where it shows like an iceberg, and it's like, oh, there's the iceberg. Like I can see this above water, right? But there's like this huge chunk of ice that's underneath the surface. Like that's the stuff that you want to work through. But a lot of my clients are only looking here. And so it's kind of doing that work.
And it's often because you're only seeing the tip and also trying to find external things
Yeah.
to look out for, trying to look inward and see if there are actually internal messages that they tell themselves. In my books, I talk about the inner critic, the inner
Yeah.
critic messages that you tell yourself. What are the common inner critic messages that you've noticed with your clients?
Yeah, I think one of them is, I'm not good enough, or this is just a phase, or, things will never change. Um, a lot of women think like, I deserved this, I think it depends, because they're really on a range of, some women are in a place where they're not sure if they want to stay in this relationship. Others want to make it better, but oftentimes the messages really come down to, I don't know what I want. You'll never have what you want. And you're
Mm.
really not good enough, or you're not worthy. And so it kind of runs the gamut, but those are some of the key ones that I hear.
Yeah, I think that would be quite a struggle if you actually don't know what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Then what are you doing? What are you asking for in this life if it's actually not clear what you want? So is that a starting point that you do with your clients? Do you help them to reflect about their core values or
Mm-hmm.
their goals, and how do you do that? How do you help them to find that, to
Yeah.
yeah, to reclaim their voice, because you need to know what you want first, right?
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of times they come to me because their marriage is suffering, and they say, I need help with this one thing. And it's like, okay, let's like back the car up just a little bit, and like, let's start with you, because I really believe that a relationship can improve even if just one person decides to kind of lean in a little bit, if that's what you want. But you have to be all in on that, right? And so we work at the beginning to kind of really hone in on your values. Like, what are your anchor points, right, for helping you be able to drive that car forward in your life? What are the things you stand for that you stand against? What are your own personal thoughts and commitments? What's like your personal manifesto for life? What are your wants and your needs? And then underneath that, there's stories, there's like conditioning and things that we've been told, like what I shared with you about what I should be doing, right? Or how
Mm.
I should be living, that we have to kind of unlearn. Like you have to unpack some of those things, and some of
And
some
let
of the
it
times that,
go.
and let it go. And so It's figuring out, who am I? What do I want? What do I need? And then even thinking about relationships, like, what type of relationship do you have? And is that what you want? It might be what you thought you were supposed to have. You might be mirroring your parents' relationship when that's not even what you want, but that's all
Mm.
you know. And so we work to uncover kind of all of those different types of things. And it really depends on what their goals are. But at the end of the day, it's helping her just stand firm in her power, and set boundaries so that she can remain whole in her own identity.
Yeah, well, with this, it's actually quite a fascinating experience because all of the things that you uncover, but at the same time, it can be frightening because you
Yes.
might end up opening a can of worms, and you could
Yes.
find yourself that you are in a position where you don't want to be in that position, but you find yourself there. So when you have someone who realizes that, oh my goodness, how did I get here? I actually don't want to be here. How do you take them from that point to moving forward and getting on to where they want to be?
Mm-hmm. I think we're really good at staying busy, right? I think we're really good at moving from thing to thing, and we're not so good at just being with our feelings and with where we're at. And so that's one of the biggest challenges, is when someone's in that space, because I really push them to just not make it mean anything. Just be with their feelings and let it be okay that they
Mm.
don't know. And that's hard. That is probably one of the hardest things,
It's
is to
hard to
just be
accept that
okay.
you don't know, right?
Right? But they just want to move forward. Like, tell me what to do to get out of here. It's like, well, let's just acknowledge that this is where we're at before we can like really move forward. And so part of what we do is a lot of like somatic work, a lot of just being and feeling the feelings and diving into those. Because if you just keep moving forward, if you
Mhm.
just keep running from thing to thing, you're just going to keep ending up in this space, because you're never learning to really deal and feel with what's going on at the core. And so that is one of the really challenging places to be. But I think it's also where you find so much power in realizing that you're going to be okay, even though you're feeling all of these things
At the moment. Yeah, I,
at
I
the moment.
actually love that because with what you've said earlier from your own experience, it seemed like you were just chasing one thing
Mm-hmm.
after another. But actually, you need to be still and acknowledge that, okay, this is what's happening before I take my next step. Let me just acknowledge that this is what's going on. Let me feel this. Let me experience this. And then when the fog clears, then
Mm-hmm.
you're able to actually make a more um, you're in a better position to actually move forward because you've let it settle for a bit and let that
Mm-hmm.
experience happen at that moment. So you're not just
Exactly.
having like a knee jerk reaction, like, I don't like this, let
And
me
that's
just
what,
run.
and yeah, that's what I did. I ran. I was feeling all these things. I was coming to such an awareness about things that I felt uncomfortable with, and rather than being with those things, I reacted. And looking back, I wish I would have done some things differently. And so now it's like, let's work through that stuff so that you can make decisions, you can show up in a way that feels aligned for who you are, and that you're not doing it from a place of fear.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's actually quite that's a liberating message, and just recognizing that, yeah, this happens, it's okay. Take
Mhm.
it easy, and then when it settles, then you'll be in a much better position to understand the situation where you're at. How do you anchor yourself in yourself before you move on and take your next step? So if there is any final message that you'd like to share with those women who might be in a position where they feel as if they've lost their identity, that they've lost their voice, what have you got to say to them, and how can you help them in this process?
Yeah, I guess the thing that I would say is that you deserve to find your voice. Like, you deserve to feel powerful in who you are. And that it's not that you need to drive your car in reverse to go back to who you used to be. It might just be that you're right where you need to be, and that you need to step into this new version of yourself. It's not necessarily that you have to go back and find someone else. You just need to re-explore who this new person is, and that you deserve to do that, and that you're enough just as you are right here, right now.
Wow, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Dana, for sharing your time and your insights with us. If people would like to reach out and, get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can reach me at my website, honestlydana.com. Otherwise, I also have a Facebook community called Reclaim You. So you're welcome to find me and join me in either of those places.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Dana. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I hope that you found this conversation helpful. I mean, certainly for some of us, whether you're a mother or whether you are just a person who feels as if you've lost your voice, in this journey we call life, it's really down to being more aware of who you are, your core values, what you stand for, what you're passionate about, and not necessarily just having all these knee jerk reaction when things start to feel comfortable. I think there's actually power in stillness, with what we're talking about today, and just really reassessing where you are before you take your next steps. So again, thank you, Dana. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And we'll catch up again next time for another purposeful conversations with me, Emmy, here in the Pami Code Facebook group. Until then, take care and bye for now. Bye. Bye bye.